drug addiction in the United States is under control.
That was President Richard Nixon claiming victory in the war on drugs just a year after he declared the war on drugs 40 years ago today. Today, because the government has pushed the drug trade into the black market and introduced government violence to the equation, the drug war has become an all-too literal term. Can we afford to keep fighting this costly battle? With us now is Ethan Nadelmann of the Drug Policy Alliance. Ethan, it's a pleasure. Welcome to Freedom Watch.
Thank you for having me on again, Judge.
So $1 trillion, 100,000 people in jail, thousands and thousands of deaths. I guess the drug war is not under control. I think Judge, you could probably say that drugs are more prevalent today than they were when Nixon declared war on them.
Of course they are. I mean, it's been $1 trillion disaster, a bipartisan disaster, a U.S. and a global disaster. I mean, we put millions of people behind bars. We've given tens of millions of people criminal records. We've generated levels of crime, violence, and corruption in Mexico, Central America, the Caribbean, around the world that make alcohol prohibition look like child's play in comparison. And, you know, it's so hard to turn the damn thing around. I mean, it has not succeeded in reducing drug abuse. More people are dying of drug overdoses today than ever before. So clearly we need a new way at this time.
I actually see this going in two directions at the same time, Ethan, and I want your thoughts on it. I see the horrific violence of SWAT teams breaking down doors, frequently the wrong doors, using far more excessive violence than is necessary, and frequently killing innocents. At the same time, I see law enforcement, some still active law enforcement, some former law enforcement, federal judges, some still active, some former, saying, you know what, this is wrong. We really need to redirect our resources. We've incarcerated too many people and spent too much money. So is this going in both directions at the same time? Police getting more violent, but judges and some cops saying we shouldn't be doing this?
Well, a perfect example is look what's going on with marijuana right now. Right now, we have 800,000 people being arrested each year on marijuana charges, and it's overwhelmingly over 90% simply for possession, like of a joint. That's double what it was 20 years ago. Meanwhile, support for legalizing marijuana, taking it out of the criminal justice system, is growing incredibly fast. I mean, back in 2005, the Gallup poll asked if people supported legalizing marijuana. 36% said yes, 60% no. 5 years later, as of last fall, that 36% in favor had become 46% in favor. The 60 against had become 50 against.
Right.
A 24-point gap had become a 4-point gap. So exactly what you're saying is happening. The public and others and law enforcement are saying enough is enough, we need a change, but law enforcement keeps wrapping up with this paramilitarization of policing, these arrests, the whole thing.
Why do we see such violence, such extreme violence, such over-the-top violence coming from the government? Not the drug users or even the drug distributors, but from the government.
Because they become arrogant with their power. You know, when you build a war on drugs, when you pour $50 to $100 billion a year, when you start putting this money in, when you let them keep the asset forfeiture money for their own accounts to buy cars and all this sort of stuff, when you don't hold them accountable, what happens is you develop a prison industrial complex, right? You now have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people making their living from this business. You got prison guards unions, you got private prison builders, you got prosecutors, you name it. Everybody feeding off this system, even though it's not doing any good, and it's become less and less accountable.
We just have a few seconds left. What are the chances that some of the states will say to the federal government, stay out, we're going to decriminalize the personal use of marijuana because we can't afford the human cost and the financial cost of prosecuting it?
Well, keep your eye next year for ballot initiatives to legalize marijuana popping up in the western states. And for your listeners in New York, what I can tell you is get on the phone today, call the New York State Senate Leader Dean Skelos and say support and pass that marijuana decriminalization bill. That'll cut arrests in half in New York City. It'll save taxpayers $50 to $100 million.
Ethan Nadelmann, it's a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Judge.